Well, the limited series, I guess that's what it was, of the all-new Venom, which had Mary Jane and Venom fused into one, basically, sharing one body, if you will. Basically, that series is coming to an end, and it's interesting the way it ended, because apparently, as we all predicted, Eddie and Venom's son Dylan found out the truth about Mary Jane and Venom. And it does look like a lot of people are going to get what they want, and that is Mary Jane and this Paul guy breaking up. But it also seems that something interesting is going to happen, because basically in the final issue of this, I guess, limited all-new Venom series, you had Mary Jane and Venom in a mindscape kind of situation. Basically an astral plane-like situation through meditation, if you will. Indian style, cross-legged Indian style meditation, if you will, kind of zen, if you will. And it's in that meditation that basically Mary Jane and Venom just, finally talk things out and finally let, each other know, how the other feels, what the other wants and everything, whether or not they're friends. And I think basically it's going to turn out to be, when we get to the regular Venom issue, which is next month, I think it was 250, where you have the former king of the symbionts, Null, I think that's his name, coming in to attack, Venom and maybe Carnage. We'll have to see. But I think in the end they are going to become friends, or at least they're going to start trying to be friends in a way to where it's like they have to understand their boundaries, if you will. They have to understand their boundaries. But the obvious question is, why did they go with Mary Jane? Now, I gave my thoughts and everything several months ago when this reveal was made. I basically said there was a lot of potential, there on the table, and it's been left on the table that they could go with. A lot of fun comedic potential if they wanted to. But they never did. They never really did, but it was there. It was there. But the question is, why go with Mary Jane out of all the suspects they gave, to people building up to that moment? Well, like I said before, I believe I said this, it's because it's a different, intriguing change. It's a change that basically coincides with the old days of comics. In that old days of comics, that motto is, expect the unexpected. Like you think you know, but then you don't know. And Mary Jane being Venom is one way that people didn't know, I should say, was going to occur. Now, you might ask yourself, well, wait a minute. If they are building to them separating, isn't that going to kill, both of them? Isn't that going to basically put them on a level of, uncertainty? Yeah, you might think that could happen, which again, makes me believe that what's going to happen is Mary Jane and Venom are going to become friends, kind of slowly build that friendship in the regular Venom series, but it's going to be at that understanding, like if Mary Jane ends up in another relationship, maybe let's say with Peter, and she lets him in on what's going on, because basically if she, she'll find out, she already knows, I should say, that he's Spider-Man. Let's say she gets back together with him and, so on and so forth. The understanding could be, hey, me and Peter want to have some privacy, Venom. You mind kind of, going into a dark place, a very secluded place of the mind, where you don't see or hear anything. And, that might be what happens. We don't know. We don't know. But again, it is, an interesting question people would have to ask, even looking back on the limited series and whether or not it's going to be an ongoing thing in the regular series. And that is why? Why go with Mary Jane, out of all the characters? And again, I think it's just because it's about expect the unexpected. It's like basically giving you all these issues with all these different variant covers, these bait and click, all these bait and switch covers, I should say, it basically made you think, okay, it could be this, it could be this character, it could be that character, and excuse me, and they definitely gave you a lot of possibilities as to why it could be such character, and so on and so forth. They gave you all kinds of possibilities, but they didn't give you that one possibility you never saw coming, and that was Mary Jane. And you might ask, well, okay, Mary Jane they chose, but why? Why did they go with Mary Jane? Well, I think it's basically because of the fact that, one, obviously some people feel that, and this is the first thing, a lot of people feel that Marvel just wants to try to keep her relevant. That's true. There is a truth to that they do want to keep Mary Jane relevant due to the fact that, well, she's not with Peter right now. Even though she knows Peter and Spider-Man are one and the same, she's not with him right now. And, basically that's what fans want. They want her back with Peter. They want her back with Peter. But this is a Mary Jane. This is a Mary Jane that basically, unknowingly gave up her marriage to Mephisto, to save Aunt May. Now there's a possibility that she's going to get back together with Peter, but it's going to be under some unique circumstances. If that happens, great. If it doesn't, a lot of people are still going to wonder, hey, why do you avoid this? What's going on? And, that's just a wait and see situation. But again, I think they're trying to keep her relevant until that moment shows up. And the reason I think that moment is going to show up, and this is the second reason why they put her in this position, is because Peter is intelligent. His IQ is way higher than Paul's. Paul could put together the jackpot device and match it up to her DNA and whatever the case may be. And now with the addition of the Venom symbiote, she can not only change maybe her powers, the powers she utilizes thanks to the whisk slot machine, or whatever it's called. But she can also use, the additional power of the Venom symbiote to not only give her, the extra, boost she needs, but give her the powers, that she selects, but beyond, what she expects. And we've seen that. We've seen that when, she talked about it in the flashback issue, the flashback issue of how she discovered her and Venom were now bonding. How they were becoming one and the same, if you will. So, again, to me, this is the second reason why, like I said, I think they have her. The first reason, of course, is they want to keep her relevant. They want to give her something to do, as well as build to a certain point to where there's going to be a reason behind all of this, and that leads into the second reason that I was talking about, and that is potentially, and I alluded to this in the first reason as well, but the second main reason is her potentially getting back together with Peter, but in a unique way that nobody would expect. And, and that is, her being bonded with Venom and knowing Peter is the only one that has an IQ, as I was trying to say, that's a lot higher than even Paul's, and that Peter could be the only one with the technology and the know-how that could separate her and Venom successfully, and and thus get her out of this bond that she has with Venom, but still allow her to pursue her crime-fighting career if she wants to as Jackpot, and maybe take a sample take a sample or basically build upon what happened initially when she was Jackpot, when she had the Venom symbiote, build upon that so she could do it without the Venom symbiote. In other words, she could become, all these different versions of herself as Jackpot, as she was with the Venom symbiote. If that makes any sense. But I think that's the second reason why she's been put into the situation. The first reason, again, unexpected, nobody saw it coming, and also keeps her relevant and builds to number two, which is her getting back with Peter, because again, this is a Mary Jane that, as I said, doesn't realize she gave up her marriage to Peter to Mephisto. She doesn't realize that. And yet, here's this opportunity of her getting back with Peter, both of them kind of probably having slight memories of that past life, but, those slight memories are not always intercoursing to where they need to be, and they're slowly fading, or quickly fading. So it makes sense that if you want to bring them back together, you do it in a way that's unique and different, but it will, at the end, when it's all said and done, satisfy everybody. It will satisfy everybody. But we'll have to see. But to me, that's the second reason. That's the second reason, getting her back with Peter so that he can come up with a solution that not only successfully separates her and Venom, but also allows her to continue on being Jackpot, but with power, but with her abilities enhanced thanks to research and study and maybe a bit of a sample from the Venom symbiote that allows her to go beyond the selective powers that she would have here and there. So that's the second reason. The third and final reason, obviously, as to why they went with Mary Jane, outside of, like I said, the number one reason, to expect the unexpected and keeping her relevant, and building to the number two reason, which is to get her back with Peter. But the third and final reason they went with Mary Jane is, like I've said before, Mary Jane. And I say this with all due respect, no offense, all due respect, no offense, Mary Jane is a female. And I will admit, females are more innovative, creative, imaginative, mischievous, and all that when they want to be, especially if they have powers that allows them to be a lot more than what they seem. And her having the Venom powers allowed her to be a lot more than what she seemed. Now, again, did they leave a lot of potential on the table? Absolutely. Absolutely, they lost but left a lot of potential on the table. Absolutely they did. But at the end of the day, again, that third reason is because, if they wanted to go any further, and they could still go further in the regular Venom series, but if they, and like I said, there's that possibility still there, but if they decide to go any further or not, again, Mary Jane seems like the kind of character, based on what she's done, outside of being a superheroine or superheroine, where, outside of that, she's a model and an actress. She can use that acting chops of hers to use the symbiont powers, to become anyone she wants to be, or anything, so that way she can find out certain situations. If that makes any sense. If that makes any sense. But again, to me, that's the third reason, because of the potential they left on the table, but they could still carry and pick up on that table into the regular Venom series. And that basically is allowing her to be more creative, more mischievous, more, imaginative, innovative, and all that kind of stuff. Sexual, seductive if they want to, flirtatious. You have all those abilities. All those abilities available to her, unlike before. I mean, look, obviously they took inspiration from Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon, where the Mary Jane there, basically had what was left over of the Carnage symbiont bonded to her DNA, and now her whole body's basically able to shapeshift into whatever she wants it to be. Whether it's into her Spider-Woman outfit, or Spider-Girl outfit, or if it's into different sets of clothes, maybe into different people, she can do it. Or, have her arms become different weapons and all that, she can do it, all because the DNA is bonded to her, and that might be what we see her. So again, three reasons, in my opinion, as to why they went with Mary Jane. One, it was unexpected, no one saw it coming, keeps her relevant, and it builds to the number two reason, and that second reason being getting her back with Peter, because Peter, has a little bit more, IQ, a little bit more of a knowledgeable IQ of how to maybe, find a solution to this predicament and successfully, unbond Mary Jane from Venom, and, do it in a safe way that keeps them both alive. And third, basically, because of the fact that, and again, I say it with all due respect, no offense, all due respect, no offense, as a female character, she has proven, she could prove, if they want to continue it on in the regular series, she could prove, to be more imaginative, more inventive, more, innovative, more mischievous, maybe even more flirtatious and seductive with, with the power she has, courtesy of Venom. And also the fact that, again, she could also go back to being Jackpot, going back to the number 2 reason, go back to being Jackpot after Peter successfully, defuses them, safely. But she could do it in a way to where she could use a sample of the Venom symbiont, the Venom symbiont, sample, if you will, a sample of the Venom symbiont, that's what I'm trying to say. She could use that to add to her powers, that she can basically increase her powers as, her changing powers as Jackpot to be more than what they were, to be exactly what we saw in the flashback, as I said, in that one issue. And again, I think what's going on here is they're taking inspiration, whether they want to admit it or not, they're taking inspiration from that Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon. Because again, in that one, Mary Jane got infected by the Carnage symbiote, became the Carnage Queen, got freed, and guess what? As a result of her time as the Carnage Queen, the symbiont fused with her DNA, but to a point that, that little bit of symbiont that was left in her, it fused with her DNA to now, all she has to do is just think about going in, being in her Spider-Girl outfit. There you go. Think about what weapon or something she wants to use, change her arm or feet into that. Or even melt down into a puddle, change into somebody different, change outfits, if you will. All she has to do is think about it and it happens. Because it's part of her DNA. And that's kind of where I think we're heading. I mean, potentially, but not in a similar manner. Because like I said, I think what they're going to build towards, this being the number 2 reason, is her and Peter being back together, and her and Peter being the only one outside of anybody else that could find a way to successfully separate them back into 2 people, or back into 2 entities. And, in that way, what happens is that you can then use a sample of the Venom symbiont, if you will, to increase her powers as Jackpot, to, allow her to go back to being Jackpot, but now she can change into any, I guess you could say, form or power or whatever it is that she rolls the counter on, and it increases, maybe tenfold due to the fact that she has the additional symbiont sample as a part of it. If it makes any sense. But those are the reasons I believe they went with Mary Jane. Those 3 reasons. And what they're building towards, and maybe what they're using as an example as to why they did it. It's different than what you see or what you saw in that Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon, but it's not. It's not that, it is different, I should say, but in a way, and what the result has become, it's very similar. Because basically, Venom and Mary Jane are fused, bonded on molecular DNA level. Same with the Mary Jane in the Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon. So the only question is, what will be the end result? Will Mary Jane and Venom be successfully separated, to the point that maybe as a token of appreciation for helping out, Venom lets Peter and Mary Jane use a sample of the symbiont form, to put it into, Mary Jane's Jackpot outfit, and she can go on doing her superhero and stuff, but now she has the addition of that symbiont, in the Jackpot counter, to where when she rolls on like a certain super form or whatever, she can become that and more, if you will. Could that be what we're leading towards in the future? And again, it would be similar but not identical, to what you see, what you saw in Ultimate Spider-Man. Similar but not identical, which is, kind of interesting choice of words to use. But to me, again, I know it sounds like I'm rambling. I did work today, guys, so I am a bit tired. I do apologize. But to me, when you really get down to it, everything I've said here, as rambleish as it sounded, to me, basically explains in a unique package as to why they went with Mary Jane. Again, I gave 3 reasons in my opinion. You know, it was unexpected. You know, it keeps her relevant, and it builds to your second reason, which is her and Peter getting back together, and Peter being the one to separate them, successfully, so that way she can go on to be Jackpot again, maybe with a bit of the symbiont as a part of her powers, stuff like that. And number three, like I said, basically it allows her character to grow even more, with however much longer they're going to go with this. Because again, there's a lot left on the table, and what they could do in the ongoing regular Venom series is they could pick some of that stuff up and utilize it, but we'll have to see. And again, I do believe they are using inspiration from stories like Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon story, the Carnage Queen situation, where the end result was basically on a molecular DNA level, Mary Jane is bonded with that symbiont, to where now she could use the symbiont powers to shape her body any which way she wants, if you know what I mean. But that's all I'm going to really say on it, guys. Again, I know I sound like I rambled all over the place, so I do apologize. I am tired. Like I said, I did work. But I just wanted to get your thoughts on everything here. I just wanted to give you my thoughts as well on the situation. What do you think is going to be the next step? Because obviously it does sound like, both want to be separated, but both are kind of, borderlining on the fact that, they're not friends, but it's being done in a way to where, they just don't want to outright say, yeah, we've become friends and all that, so they're trying to avoid it and everything, because Venom wants Eddie back, Mary Jane wants to be separated, but done safely. What's going to be the situation? What's going to be the result? What do you think is going to happen? And obviously this is going to tie into the Eddie Brock Carnage situation, because Eddie Brock is bonded with Carnage. So how is that going to play a role in everything going forward? It's going to be interesting to see. But let me know what guys, let me know what your thoughts are, I should say, on what I've had to talk about here. What do you think is going to be the next step? Do you agree with some of the things I said, even though I sound very ramblish on it? Let me know. And do me a favor, guys, before I close down here, do me a favor, like the video, ring the bell for notifications, subscribe to the channel, and everything, and also click on the links in the description to find my content elsewhere outside of YouTube, as well as also click on the last link in the description to go to my Teespring store for merchandise you can't get anywhere else. But guys, give me your thoughts. Love to hear from each and every one of you on this, and until next time, I am out.